Hello, my friends. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.
I thought moving into a quiet suburban neighborhood would be the start of a peaceful life. I'd left a chaotic city apartment behind, the kind where sirens were as common as people, and replaced it with a small house on a tree-lined street where the neighbors waved, lawns were perfectly mowed, and the night seemed calm. It was my first night alone in the house. My partner had gone out of town for the weekend, and I was looking forward to it. Movies, snacks, maybe a long soak in the tub. The kind of night where nothing could go wrong. But something did. It started just after 11. I had finished dinner and was sprawled on the couch when I saw it. Movement across the living room window. A shadow, tall and thin, pacing just beyond the streetlight's glow. I froze. Whoever it was didn't belong. The street was empty. I pulled the blinds aside, heart pounding, and that's when I realized it wasn't pacing. It wasn't moving at all. It was standing there, watching. I texted my partner, "Hey, there's someone outside my house." Creepy. No response. I try not to panic. Maybe it was a neighbor taking a walk. Maybe someone lost. I peeked through the curtains again, and it was still there. Not moving, not blinking, not breathing, at least not visibly. I locked the doors and checked the windows. Everyone secured. My phone showed full signal, so I called a friend, explained what I was seeing. They laughed it off. Probably just someone looking for a house number or a cat, they said. I want to believe that, but I didn't. Something felt wrong. Hours passed. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but I kept glancing toward the window. Each time I looked, the figure remained, standing at the edge of the street, impossibly still, as if carved from shadow. At 2 a.m., I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. Not from the street, from inside the house. I froze. The air seemed heavier, denser, like it had been waiting for me to notice. The hairs on my arms stood straight. My front door, double-locked, rattled as if someone or something was pressing against it from the outside. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I didn't know why. I wasn't sure it would help. I thought about calling 911, but before I could, the door stopped rattling. Silence fell. Complete, suffocating silence. I was tense, every muscle coiled, afraid to breathe. Then I heard it. From the living room window, a slow, deliberate knock. I didn't respond. My heart pounded in my ears. Another knock, louder this time. Then a third, each one slower than the last, perfectly measured. I tried to tell myself it was a branch or the wind, but I knew. Someone or something was outside. It was waiting, patient. Hours blurred. I didn't sleep. I stayed in the bedroom with all the lights on, listening, waiting, watching shadows. Daylight finally came, but when I looked outside, the figure was gone. Relief washed over me. Maybe it had been a prank. Maybe I had imagined it. I tried to resume normal life. I went to work, avoided looking out the windows, told myself it was over. But that night it returned. Closer this time, at the edge of the driveway. Always watching, always silent, always patient. One night, after it had been several weeks of this, I decided to confront it. I had to know why it was here, what it wanted. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, prepared to yell, to defend myself, to do anything to end this nightmare. It didn't move, but I noticed something strange. Its hands were clasped in front of it, and it held a small object, a notebook, leather-bound, worn. Without thinking, I stepped closer. My foot touched the gravel, and the figure lifted its head, faceless and smooth, and tilted it slightly. Then it extended the notebook toward me. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to run, but curiosity or madness won. I reached out and took the notebook. The moment I touched it, the world shifted. My thoughts were no longer my own. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. Streets I'd never walked, houses I'd never seen, people I'd never met. And with them, a chilling understanding. The notebook recorded lives. The faceless figure wasn't just outside my house. It was outside every house in every street, watching, learning, waiting. I dropped the notebook and stumbled back. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. Then, impossibly, it dissolved into shadow, spreading across the yard like ink in water, seeping toward the houses on the street, toward the neighborhood, as if it were part of the night itself. I ran inside and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't call anyone. I watched the shadows, waiting for it to return, knowing it always would. Weeks later, I discovered something worse. A small scratch on the inside of my window, tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Another appeared each night, forming letters over time. I stared at the window one evening, and the letters spelled my name. Then a question: do you see now? I realized the truth. The figure wasn't outside to threaten me. It was teaching me. It had always been here, but not as a visitor. It was inside me too, in the corners of my mind. And now, after weeks of watching, it had chosen me to understand, to see. I tried to fight it. I threw myself into work, friends, errands, anything to distract myself. But the feeling persisted. The patience, the waiting, the watching. It became unbearable. Then, one night, I stepped outside to confront it again. I was tired of the waiting, the fear. And this time, it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but directly in my mind. You're the outside now. The world shifted, and I understood. Not as metaphor, not as hallucination. I became the watcher, the patient observer. I was no longer alone. Not really. And as I look back now, writing this down in a house I barely recognize as mine, I know the figure hasn't left. I become it. I wait. I watch. And I know that the next time someone is alone, someone notices a shadow at their window, it will be me, or someone like me. The horror isn't outside. The horror is in the waiting. Always. And someday, I'll be outside your window too. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months. After a year of deadlines and fluorescent office lights, I convinced my cousin Mike to join me for a weekend in the Appalachian Mountains. He had a map, I had a tent, and neither of us had any idea what we were getting into. We arrived mid-afternoon and parked near a small creek where the mountains opened into a clearing thick with pine needles. The air was sharp, the kind that fills your lungs so deeply you can almost feel it in your bones. The forest looked ordinary at first, peaceful, inviting, but as we unpacked, I noticed the silence. Not the kind of quiet you expect in the woods, with birds and rustling leaves, but a heavier quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. That first night, we built a fire and roasted some sausages. The sky darkened to a deep violet, stars scattered like dust across the peaks. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. We joked, told stories, and eventually crawled into the tent, exhausted. I woke hours later. The fire had burned out, the embers gone. I thought I heard whispering, faint at first, then louder. My flashlight revealed nothing but trees, trunks stretching into the darkness. I nudged Mike. Do you hear that? He stirred, groaned, and shook his head. It's just the wind. But it wasn't the wind. The whispers formed patterns, repeating sounds too deliberate to be natural. They carried through the trees, sometimes in rhythm with something I couldn't see. I strained to listen, and then I noticed it, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. Too tall, too thin, limbs bent oddly. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Mike," I whispered. He blinked toward the trees. "What the hell is that?" We tried to leave the clearing, but every path seemed wrong. Trees that were there earlier weren't. Stones had shifted. The creek ran in a slightly different curve. We realized we had no idea which way led out. The forest wasn't ordinary. It had rearranged itself, folding in on us. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. Every so often, the whispering returned, circling us, repeating words we almost understood. Stay, stay, stay. Shadows shifted in ways that made our stomachs churn. We ran blindly at one point, tripping over roots and rocks, our lungs burning, only to find ourselves back at the same clearing where we had set up camp. The tall figure watched from the trees, never moving closer, but never leaving. Desperate, we stumbled through the fog and came upon a cave, partially hidden behind hanging vines. Inside, it was damp, with walls slick with moisture. I felt drawn toward it, though I had no rational reason to enter. Mike hesitated. Maybe we shouldn't. But I went in anyway. The cave widened into a chamber, the ceiling high and uneven. Strange symbols were carved into the rock, old, crude, yet unmistakable in their intent. In the center, a shallow pit was lined with black stones that seemed to absorb the dim light from our flashlights. The whispers were louder now, emanating from the pit, forming syllables I didn't recognize but somehow felt compelled to obey. And then I saw them, dozens of tiny shapes pressing against the walls. Not animals, not human. Limbs bent in impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly, watching, waiting. My stomach turned, my breath caught. Mike's flashlight fell on me. "Don't, whatever you do, don't touch it." But I couldn't resist. Something in me pulled toward the pit. I knelt, feeling an almost electric hum from the stones. The whispers surrounded me. "Come, join, see." Mike grabbed my arm. "You don't understand. It's not a place. It's alive." I tore my hand away, but my mind felt heavy, fogged. The chamber seemed to pulse, breathing, alive. I realized then that the cave wasn't just a location. It was a trap, a living entity luring us in. And Mike, he was frozen, staring at the shadows, his eyes wide and unblinking. The tall figure appeared at the cave entrance, its limbs bending in ways that defied nature. The whispers crescendoed, enveloping us. Mike screamed, and I grabbed him, dragging him toward the exit. The creature didn't follow. It didn't need to. The forest itself seemed to fold around us, the path twisting and turning. Somehow, we emerged back into the clearing. But the forest wasn't the same. The creek was gone, replaced by a shallow, stagnant pond. The clearing was smaller, trees pressed in tighter, and the air smelled of iron and decay. Mike was pale, shaking. "We can't leave," he said. "It won't let us." We ran again, following faint trails, but the forest resisted. Every landmark we tried to follow shifted, and the whispers never stopped, guiding us toward something we couldn't understand. Exhaustion overtook us, and we collapsed near a rock outcropping. That's when I saw it. Dozens of black stones, identical to the ones in the cave, half buried in the moss. My hand reached out before I could stop it. The instant my fingers touched one, I felt a pull, not physical but mental. Images flashed in my mind. The cave, the symbols, the shapes pressed against the walls, Mike trapped in the shadows, screaming silently. The forest wanted me. I tried to let go, but the pull intensified. It was a choice, subtle, insidious. Leave the stone and run, or take it and see. I took it. The whispers became clearer. See what you are. See what waits. The ground shifted beneath me. The forest around me warped, folding into itself. Trees elongated, shadows stretched impossibly, and I felt my body pulled into the earth. Mike tried to grab me, but his hands went through mine as if I was already slipping out of this world. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the forest closing over me, the whispers now chanting my name in harmony with the stone's pulse. I woke hours later, or maybe days. Time no longer mattered, sitting at the edge of the creek near our campsite. The sun was low, spilling golden light across the water. Mike was gone. My pack and tent were intact. No evidence of a cave, the stones, or the shadows remained. It was as if the forest had never been hostile, as if it had never existed that way at all. Except for the stone in my pocket. Smooth, black, warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And every night since, I dream of the cave, the shapes, and the whispers. But here's the difference. The forest isn't trying to trap me anymore. It's waiting, patient, silent, watching. And I know one day, I will hear its call again, and this time, I won't resist. I return to the city, but the mountains follow me. In reflections of windows, in the corners of forest during drives home, I see shadows moving just beyond sight. I feel the tug of the stone constantly, a reminder that I belong to the Appalachians now, in a way I cannot escape. The mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient and they never forget. And one day, they will call for me again. I didn't mean to go camping that weekend. My friends had been relentless, talking about escaping the city, sleeping under the stars, getting back to nature, as they put it. I finally gave in because I thought it would be harmless. I didn't know it would almost kill me. We drove for hours, winding up a narrow road through the mountains. Nate, my oldest friend, insisted he knew a secret spot far from anyone else. I should have been wary when the GPS lost signal halfway up the ridge, and Nate just laughed it off. "Don't worry, that's part of the fun," he said, grinning as if oblivious to the tension creeping up my spine. The clearing we found was beautiful. A small lake reflected the late afternoon sun, and thick pines surrounded us on all sides. It looked like a postcard. We set up camp quickly, eager to start a fire before darkness. The first few hours were easy, laughing, joking, even fishing in the lake. But as night fell, the forest changed. Shadows stretched longer than they should, moving in ways that didn't make sense. The lake, which had been calm and clear, now looked wrong, like it was absorbing light instead of reflecting it. I felt eyes on me, though I saw nothing. The others didn't notice, or maybe they ignored it. Around midnight, I woke to a scraping sound outside my tent. I froze, listening. There was no wind, no animals I recognized, just a slow, deliberate scraping circling our campsite. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but when I shone it toward the sound, nothing moved. Yet the scraping continued, stopping whenever I moved the beam. I tried to wake the others. Nate and Jess stirred but didn't fully wake. Only Tyler, half asleep, mumbled something about dreaming and rolled over. I felt a wave of panic. Whatever was out there was intelligent. It knew we were watching, and it knew we were afraid. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely breathing, barely moving. By dawn, the sound stopped, and the forest seemed normal again. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream. The others were cheerful, oblivious, and I wanted to believe it too. We spent the morning hiking around the lake, but the trail didn't feel familiar. Trees leaned over us, branches forming unnatural arches. Rocks and roots twisted in ways that seemed almost deliberate, like the forest itself had been reshaped while we weren't looking. I mentioned it to Nate, and he laughed nervously. "You're imagining things," he said, but I wasn't. I could feel the difference. That evening, the lake glimmered in the twilight, almost like a mirror. The air grew heavy, humid, and there was a faint metallic smell. I felt compelled to step closer to the water, and when I did, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints, huge, far too long for any human, lined the edge of the lake. They led straight into the water, disappearing without a splash. I tried to alert the others. Nate leaned down to look and straightened quickly, his face pale. Jess and Tyler ignored him. I could tell Nate was scared, but none of us said much. We returned to camp, but sleep came slowly, if at all. Around 2 a.m., I woke to movement. Something was in our clearing. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it shifting between the trees, circling us, patient, deliberate. My tent flap rustled. I wanted to call out, but my voice wouldn't work. And then a shadow fell across my face, a tall shape bending toward me, impossibly thin, stretching higher than the tallest pines. I screamed, and the others woke. Nate grabbed a flashlight, and we shined it toward the edge of the clearing. Nothing. The shadow was gone. But in the lake, ripples spread outward from the place where the footprints had disappeared. The water churned as if something beneath was moving, something large and alive. Panic took over. We packed immediately and tried to leave. But the forest had shifted. Trails looped back on themselves. Clearings we had passed in daylight now looked alien. Trees leaned together, blocking paths we had walked only hours before. No matter which direction we ran, the forest seemed endless. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The sun hung low, static in the sky, and my throat burned from calling out for the others. Then I saw them, figures emerging between the trees. Tall, thin, bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Their faces were blank, featureless. They didn't move like humans. They didn't walk, they glided, and they were watching us. Nate and Tyler froze, their eyes wide, mouths open but no sound coming out. Jess screamed and ran, disappearing into the trees. I chased her, but she was gone in seconds, swallowed by the shadows. That's when I realized they weren't after us. They were testing us, measuring fear, patience, awareness. I tried to run again, but the forest resisted. Roots twisted underfoot, trees leaning inward. And the lake, I saw ripples forming shapes, hundreds of shadowed forms rising beneath the surface. The figures didn't attack, didn't make sound, but I felt them pressing on my mind, aware of my thoughts, my memories, my fears. Hours later, I stumbled into a clearing that looked like our campsite. The fire was cold, tents collapsed. My pack was where I left it, and then I saw it, my reflection in the lake. But it wasn't mine. My face was elongated, twisted, my eyes black. I stumbled back in horror. Behind me, the water rippled. The reflection of my friends appeared too, featureless, hollowed-out versions of themselves, smiling in ways that didn't belong to them. I realized then that the lake didn't just take time or place. It took people. Not fully, not physically, but pieces of them. Their minds, their essence, their being. They were still alive in some form, trapped in the forest, the water, the shadows. They were the keepers. Patient, eternal. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. When I finally emerged onto the road, hours later, or maybe it was days, my car was there untouched. I drove away without looking back. The forest was silent, unbroken, normal to anyone passing through. I tried to return for them, but the clearing, the lake, the forest, they didn't exist on any map. They had disappeared. My friends were gone. And I know now that anyone who wanders too far into the wilderness, anyone curious enough to explore the perfect spot, can disappear too. Not dead, not alive, but trapped somewhere the forest owns. I tell people camping is dangerous, not because of bears or falling trees, but because some places are alive. They wait. And if you're unlucky, if you go too far, they don't just watch. They take. I survived that weekend, but I don't know for how long I can remain myself. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I feel it. The pull of the lake, the forest, the shadows, and I hear faint whispers calling me back. And I know they're patient. They'll wait. And one day, they might not let me leave. I never should have gone into the back hollows of the Appalachians that summer. Not because they're dangerous in any ordinary sense, but because they hold things the world isn't meant to see. I learned that the hard way. My name is Mara, and I grew up near Boone, North Carolina. Hiking and exploring the mountains was my escape, my way of thinking clearly when life became unbearable. That July, after a nasty breakup and a pile of debt from school, I wanted nothing but the quiet. I rented a small cabin in the mountains, far from towns and roads, thinking a few days alone would help me reset. The first 2 days were peaceful. I hiked along trails my grandfather had shown me as a child, streams trickling past mossy rocks, birds singing from branches high above. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and sunlight. I even found a clearing where wildflowers grew like a secret garden. Everything felt right, almost too perfect. On the third day, I decided to take a trail I'd never walked before. It was narrower than most, barely visible, and the undergrowth clawed at my legs as I moved through. By mid-afternoon, the trees grew taller and denser, the light dimming under the canopy. I noticed the air felt heavier, as if it were pressing down on my shoulders. I shrugged it off, attributing the unease to fatigue. I pushed forward until the trail ended abruptly at a steep drop. Below, a foggy hollow stretched for what felt like miles, and at the center, a small pond reflected the dim sunlight in a way that seemed unnatural, like the water was absorbing light rather than reflecting it. As I descended toward the pond, I saw something that made me freeze. Shadows, long, spindly, human-shaped, moved along the edge of the trees, but not like normal shadows. They shifted independently of any light source, bending around trunks and rocks, disappearing and reappearing at random. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, they were closer. A voice whispered my name, not out loud, not carried by the wind, but in my head. "Come up." I stumbled backward, heart hammering, tripping over roots. The shadows recoiled, then advanced, and the voice returned, insistent, "Come." Panic made me turn, and I ran. I ran blindly through the thick forest, breaking branches and scraping my hands against bark. Every path I took seemed to loop me back to the pond. The shadows waited at its edge, silent, unmoving, their presence pressing into my chest. By evening, I had collapsed near the water, exhausted. The fog rolled over the pond like smoke, thickening, glowing faintly in the dark. That's when I noticed the pond itself wasn't still. The surface rippled, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. Faces, some screaming, some silent, distorted, pressed against an invisible barrier beneath the water. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The water called me, whispered promises of understanding, of escape from everything that weighed on me. The shadows on the shore swayed in rhythm with the ripples, and the voice, no longer a whisper, filled my head. Join us. Be one with the hollow. I screamed, throwing myself backward. My foot hit something solid in the mud, a small wooden box, old and waterlogged. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were strange carvings, small stones, and animal bones arranged meticulously. At the center lay a mirror. I lifted the mirror and gasped. It wasn't my reflection staring back. It was me, but wrong. My eyes were black, and my mouth moved as if it were breathing beneath the glass. I felt the pull again, stronger this time, tugging at my mind, my body. Desperation gave me an idea. I grabbed the mirror and hurled it into the pond. It hit the water, and the ripples exploded outward. The shadows shrieked in a way I will never forget, an unholy, collective sound, and surged toward the pond. For a moment, I thought it would be the end. Then silence. The fog lifted abruptly. The shadows were gone. The pond was calm, as if it had never been disturbed. I didn't wait to question it. I ran, following what I hoped was the trail back to the cabin. When I finally emerged at dusk, the forest felt normal again, almost too normal. Birds sang, crickets chirped, the air smelled of pine. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't tell anyone what happened. I packed the cabin early the next morning and drove down the mountain, refusing to look back. Weeks passed. Life returned to a semblance of normal. I avoided the mountains entirely. But one night, I woke to a faint tapping at my bedroom window. I ignored it, but then it came again, and again, a rhythm. I realized it was the sound of fingers slender, too long, tapping a pattern I couldn't decipher. The next morning, I found a small wooden box on my desk. Inside were stones, bones, and carvings identical to the ones in the pond. My reflection in the mirror on the wall smiled back at me, but the smile wasn't mine. I tried to burn the box. The flames wouldn't touch it. I tried to bury it. It reappeared on my desk the next morning. The tapping continued each night, growing louder, closer. I know now that the hollow didn't release me. It only let my body leave. A part of me, the part that saw the shadows, that heard the voice that stared into the pond, is still there, trapped, and it is patient. Every night, the tapping grows. Every night, the mirror smiles at me, and I know one day will call me back. Because some things in the Appalachians are not just hidden. They wait, they watch, and they never forget. I've been obsessed with abandoned places for as long as I can remember. The older, rustier, and more decrepit, the better. There's a beauty in decay, a sort of melancholy poetry that makes the air feel alive with secrets. But I've learned that some places are abandoned for a reason, and that reason isn't always human. I found a Crosswell Asylum by accident, really. I was researching old psychiatric hospitals in Pennsylvania for a photography project, and the name kept appearing in forums and obscure local history articles. Everyone warned against it, though no one explained why. Some wrote that it was cursed. Others said the staff there conducted experiments that never should have existed. All of them ended their warnings with the same advice: do not go alone. I smiled and thought, of course I'll go alone. It was a foggy evening in late October when I arrived. The asylum sat atop a hill, surrounded by a forest that swallowed the last rays of sun. The gates were long gone, twisted metal jutting from the ground like skeletal fingers. I parked a little way off and approached on foot, flashlight in hand. The air was heavy with rot and mildew, a smell that clung to my clothes and hair. The front entrance was wide open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. I stepped inside. The air was cold, impossibly cold, and damp, like the building itself exhaled in warning. The walls were lined with peeling paint and faded posters of long-forgotten treatments. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, though I was careful to tread lightly. I moved through the main hall, snapping photos of everything. Rusted wheelchairs, broken beds, and shattered glass littered the floor. In some of the patient rooms, personal belongings were still left behind. A torn shoe, a doll missing its eyes, scraps of fabric curled yellow with age. I picked up a small notebook and flipped through it. The handwriting was spidery and uneven, filled with sketches of figures that had no faces, their arms stretching into impossible lengths. Notes scribbled in the margins read, "They watch. They wait." I laughed at myself, telling myself it was just paranoia. But I didn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Shadows moved oddly here, stretching along walls even when I wasn't moving. I chalked it up to fatigue, telling myself the fog outside had warped the light. I found a stairwell leading to the basement and hesitated. This was the place people mentioned in the forums, the heart of the asylum's darkest stories. Patients had disappeared down there, or worse. Staff had vanished, some presumed dead. The air down there was heavy, almost viscous, as I descended, each step creaking in protest. The basement was larger than I expected, a maze of hallways and rooms that seemed to twist in ways that made no architectural sense. Rusted machinery for electroshock therapy and medical equipment littered the floor. Shadows pooled in the corners, dense and unnatural. My flashlight flickered. I froze. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, something slipping between the beams of light. Then I heard it, a whisper, "Don't go further." I spun, shining the flashlight into every corner, but there was nothing. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was just the wind. I moved forward. I came across a room filled with old patient files, stacked haphazardly on shelves and the floor. As I sifted through them, I noticed something strange. Every name had 2 entries. Each person had died, or was recorded as having been discharged. But then there was a second entry with the same name, months or years later, with no explanation. And next to the second entries, someone had scrawled, "Returned." I felt a chill. I heard the whisper again, closer this time, "Leave before it notices you." The hair on my neck stood on end. I turned down another corridor and noticed the walls here were different. They seemed darker, almost wet, absorbing the light. My flashlight flickered violently. That's when I saw them. Figures standing at the end of the hallway, tall and thin, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. They were featureless, pale, and motionless, as though they had been carved from the shadows themselves. I froze. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. They didn't move, yet I felt their attention like weight pressing against my chest. My breath came shallow. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. When I looked up, They had moved closer, though I hadn't seen them step. Panic finally won. I ran blindly, twisting down hallways that seemed endless. Every door I tried was either blocked or led back to the same hallway, distorted and alien. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus. Stay, stay, don't leave. I burst into a larger room, what looked like a common area, and froze again. A figure sat in the center, hunched over a chair, rocking slowly. Its face was hidden, but I felt it was watching me. I noticed dozens of photographs scattered across the floor. Patients, staff, all with their eyes blacked out, faces erased. One photo, however, made my blood run cold. It was of me, taken that very day, standing outside the asylum. My mind reeled. How could that be possible? I backed toward the door, heart hammering. The figure slowly raised its head, revealing a hollow, featureless face, yet I felt it was smiling. And then the shadows around it began to pulse, stretching toward me, wrapping around my legs like cold water. I screamed and fought, pulling myself free, and ran toward a hallway that seemed brighter, the end illuminated by moonlight. I pushed through an old emergency exit and stumbled into the night. The forest outside was silent, still. The asylum loomed behind me, dark and unmoving. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing by the side of the road. I thought it was over. I thought I had escaped. But over the next few days, strange things began happening. Mirrors would fog up with handprints that weren't mine. Objects moved in my apartment when I wasn't looking. At night, I'd hear whispers just beyond my bedroom door. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then, one evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. You left something behind. Inside was a single attachment, a photograph. I opened it. It was me, sleeping in my bed that night. Only I wasn't alone. Standing over me was one of the featureless figures from the basement, watching. I knew then that I hadn't escaped. I had brought a part of the asylum with me. Whatever had haunted those halls had attached itself to me, tethered me to it in ways I couldn't explain. And it was patient, methodical, waiting for the right moment. The final realization hit me slowly, terrifyingly. I wasn't being haunted just because of curiosity. I was being claimed. The Crosswell Asylum didn't want my life. It wanted my mind, and one day it would take it completely. Until then, I exist in a state of constant vigilance. I leave doors open at night, lights on, windows cracked, hoping to confuse it. But deep down, I know there is no confusing the asylum. It doesn't exist in the normal world. It exists where I exist. It waits in shadows, in mirrors, in the empty spaces I can't see. And I know, inevitably, it will come for me fully. Because some abandoned places aren't just abandoned. They're alive, and Crosswell is hungry.
I hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying tales.